I'm Caroline McCoy, the Oxford American's digital managing editor, and I'm here with Rebecca Gayle Howell and Martha Park. Rebecca Gayle Howell is a poet writing new myths for climate change. Her genre-bending work has received awards like the United States Artists Fellowship, two fellowships from the Fine Arts Works Center in Provincetown, and the Aiken Taylor Award for Modern American Poetry. Her latest book is Erased Genesis, just out from Project Poëtica, Bridwell Press. And from 2014 to 2024, she served as the poetry editor for the Oxford American, the second in the magazine's history. Martha Park is the author of World Without End, Essays on Apocalypse and After. A writer and illustrator from Memphis, Tennessee, Martha has received fellowships and support from South Arts, the Religion and Environment Story Project, the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts, and the Economic Hardship Reporting Project. Her work has appeared in Orion Magazine, the Oxford American, The Guardian, The Bitter Southerner, and elsewhere. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I'm so excited about this conversation. You're about to talk about Rebecca's new book, Erased Genesis, which is a work of poetry that reimagines the first three chapters of the book of Genesis through the lens of climate change. We were lucky enough to publish an excerpt from it online, and I encourage anyone watching this video who hasn't picked up Rebecca's book yet to go to oxfordamerican.org and just get a sense for how Rebecca creates erasure poetry using strokes of watercolors. It's truly a gorgeous book, like physically a gorgeous book, conceptually a gorgeous book. In all the ways, it's beautiful. We're really thrilled to have Martha leading this conversation. So I am going to turn off my camera and retreat to the audience and let you take it away, Martha.
Hey, Rebecca.
Hi, Melissa.
I'm,
It's so good to be with you.
it's so good to be with you. I'm so excited to talk to you about this book. And I figured for people who haven't seen it yet, just talk a little bit about your process and how you found your way into the book, just kind of as an introduction.
I mean, the inciting event was that I had a commission on my desk to write a poem for my friend Marcus Wicker.
Mm.
Um, he was the poetry editor at the Southern Indiana Review, and he was leaving that post. And they were putting together an issue to celebrate his role as editor and his work as a poet. He and I know each other from the Fine Arts Works Center. We were there together the first time I was there in 2010, 2011. That was the first time I ever lived outside of the state of Kentucky. And so it was a very dramatic awakening to that very dramatic landscape that is, Provincetown. And I was reading a lot about climate change while I was there. I was writing Render. I had my soulmate dog with me, whose name was Key. She was a 90-pound Malinois Great Dane mix. And she and I would walk a lot. And so I'd be walking around Land's End thinking about how I was walking in a brigadoon, right? Like in a place that probably wouldn't exist
Mhm.
when ocean levels began to rise. So these are the kinds of thoughts that I had when I was returning in my heart to my love and respect for Marcus. And he's also a contemplative Christian, and we share that as well. So I just came to the text and thought I would be finding one poem. And the more I worked, the more I realized that the poems wanted to compile into telling a story.
So, how did you, as part of that process, find yourself reaching for Genesis in particular or for scriptural texts at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's difficult to tie together in a kind of clean logic, you know. I tend to work. I'm interested in mystery, and I'm interested in how poetry can take us into new understanding and to new experience that we haven't yet imagined. And so when I'm working, um, I try to listen to my intuition and to what feels alive, you know? So when I was writing Render, often I would get a little clip of language in my ear and I would just follow it until the next clip came. And that
Mhm.
really sort of taught me how I want to pursue my practice of poetry. that, the work will tell us what it wants to be if we listen. And that's been my experience. And so thinking about, that connection that I have with Marcus in our faith and in that place, um, felt it just felt right to come to Genesis. It's
Mhm.
also true that the book that underpins the scholarly questions I have in Erased Genesis is a book that I was reading while I was there in Provincetown the first time. Ellen F. Davis's Scripture, Culture, and Agriculture, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
In which she makes it clear that King James Version translation of awarding us dominion over the earth is an inaccurate translation. So that really stayed with me too.
Hmm. Yeah, when I first heard about your book before I got a copy of it and saw it myself, the first two things that sprang to mind were the story of Thomas Jefferson cutting out the miracles out of his Bible with a razor blade
Mm,
and like government redactions, like the big black
mm,
bars. And it was so interesting to me to see the kind of painterly way that you erase the lines and how the book feels very handmade.
mm.
And it also retains something of that. There's something about the Thomas Jefferson story I love, which is just like, I cannot accommodate this. And so I'm going to, with my body, remove this
Yeah,
part of the text.
yeah.
And there's something about that that I find really moving. I think it speaks to just how deeply buried these stories are in us and how deeply rooted they are, that we really have to wrestle with them and in some cases to create a version of them that we can accommodate.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so I was really interested in, there was a quote about your book from Cassidy Hall that said that erased Genesis unties the knots of harmful tradition. So I was really curious about kind of those relationships, like digging into scripture that might be very meaningful. It might be sometimes feels over familiar, or it might feel sometimes like there's a unresolved conflict and that we need to kind of, with our
Right.
own, kind of insert ourselves and reshape that text, like, or our relationship with it.
Hmm.
And I'm just wondering if that was a part of the process for you as well.
Certainly. Yeah. There's so much of what you just said that it's got my brain cooking. Let me see if I can get my thoughts
That's
organized.
probably too long of a question.
No, 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 no. It's such a good question. I'm a super fan of yours, so it's just such a privilege to be in conversation with you.
I feel the
Um,
same.
yeah, so I think a few things. I think the government redaction documents is a useful connection point for how erasure poetry is often carried out in
Mhm.
contemporary practice, needing to erase texts that have hurt us, um, which is a practice I have a lot of respect for. But
Mhm.
it's not really what I feel like I'm doing here. I'm a literary translator, and one thing that interests me is how translation practice, which is a creative practice, has changed over the centuries. And so, the way that the Bible has been translated has been very much like the practice you just described, where whether it be contemporary collaborators, enormous teams working together, or collaborators across time working from previous versions of the text. Um, and I also include weather, time, insects in that team, you know?
Yeah.
And what seems to me to be true is that when we call these texts living texts,
Mhm.
that's true because we've allowed them to live inside us.
Yeah.
I also agree with the Buddhist thought that life has changed. And so when we call a text a living text, what I hear is a changing text,
Mhm.
a text that we allow to change with us and grow with us. And
Hmm.
that was a far more acceptable practice possibility in early translation methods. Um, in our current moment, we tend to think of translation as needing a one-to-one,
Hmm.
an exactness and a rightness, you know, which of course we often see applied to the scriptures in church contexts too.
Hmm.
Um, but the King James Version was a watershed moment because it was produced at the moment when the nation state was really forming itself as supreme. And there was a real push for, nationalism, for rightness, for singularity. And the idea of the King James Version was this was going to be the one right version. So, before that, translators would work in multidimensional ways, right? You would produce a version that had multiple translations right next to each other, or multiple languages right next to each other. And you would work in a way that would allow and foreground those differences as teachers, as doors open for the reader or the practitioner to come in and imagine themselves as part of the life of this text.
Hmm.
And, over the generations, we've become more and more convinced of that singularity, of the need for that rightness. And I'm just not interested in that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm more interested in, yeah, the possibility that these texts are alive because they live in us, because they change in us and they change us.
Hmm.
That feels to me to be uh, a marker of what makes a literature a sacred literature.
Yeah, absolutely. And it seems like um, such a remedy in a time where scripture is looked to be like authoritative, which is not an interest I have for scripture at all, or like a need that I understand.
Yeah.
And I think there's something about, especially so as you move through the first chapter, it's kind of, it feels like that kind of first section of the first chapter is setting up the way we often to our detriment have understood Genesis is like granting humans dominion over the earth. And then there's that second part of the first chapter, which is just a refrain of or several times. And it's like every time I get to that part, I just feel this kind of like there's kind of a magic of feeling like seeing the physical lines you've painted over the text and kind of seeking out that there's one way to hear this, or is kind of drawing you in that we're going to be traveling into a different way of understanding the text.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering, like, as you were creating the book, just a little bit more granularly, like what your process was like, because there's a million books you could have created out of the process of erasure. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
wondering how you kind of found your way into this version. Do you have like a million copies that you've erased in different ways and different combinations? I would just love to know about that.
So, when I work as a translator, and I'd imagine that when you're writing, especially, the kind of prose that you work in, you're probably working like first, second, final draft, right? And that's what you publish. Um, as a translator, I've learned to work laterally. And so when I'm translating poem, I'll do a version that highlights this technique and a version that highlights this technique. And so I'll create 5 or 10 versions of the same source poem. And then I will live around them for a while to learn from them,
Mm.
how they're making themselves and how they might instruct a version that wants to be in relationship with readers. And as a poet, as a source writing poet, I've learned to work that way too. I'll do that for my own work. I'll create lateral versions and learn from them. And so, in some ways, what I'm doing with Erased Genesis is just a natural part of my practice at this point, where I'm working with the same source text in the sense that all writing is translation. I'm working with the same source text over and over and over again to try to learn, to try to listen to it and learn from it.
Mhm.
Um, and so that's what I was doing here, right? So as you just said, right, like I'm working with chapters 1, 2, and 3 of the King James Genesis. But I'm finding different poems each time I come to the same source text. And yes, there were many, yeah, there were a lot of versions. And there were also a lot of versions of the paintings, I will say, as well. May I interrupt myself to tell a quick story that will
Mhm.
explain what I've been trying to say? My teacher, Jean, who I mentioned in the book, Jean Valentine, who was a great and true poet. By the time she was my teacher, she was in her 80s. And I once saw her give a 2 hour public interview. We in the audience were so excited to be able to ask her anything we wanted to ask her about, poetry. And every time we asked her a question, she would say, I don't know. It's a mystery, you know?
Uh-huh.
And I think about that all the time now because, like, that was the most honest she could possibly have been with us, right? Like, here she
Mhm.
was, this 80-year-old master of the art, and her life had brought her to a place where she could just say, I really just don't know. It's
Yeah.
much bigger than me.
Yeah.
So that's the place I want to be in with my work. And so I don't mean to
Mhm.
be frustrating with not having a clear answer, but in many ways, it's just a matter of listening. Yeah, it's like a deep practice of listening, which I agree with Thomas Merton is contemplative prayer.
Mhm.
That there's a kind of prayer that's not about talking; it's about listening instead.
Mhm.
And that's also my relationship to the natural world that I find the more I move into this life, the more I just want to be quiet and listen, and be a very, very, very small part of what is bigger than me.
Mhm.
And so I think of poetry as a part of that ecosystem.
I think the book really evokes that feeling where I found myself the first time I opened it, it was like I was in a house full of family for
Mm,
like a holiday or something, and I had like 15 minutes to myself.
mm,
And I started reading, and
mm,
really quickly I was like, I'm not like quiet enough to hear this book right now. And there's a way that there's this kind of tension where sometimes a page might have like one word that's still left,
mm,
and then you've got these beautiful blue lines and you're kind of looking for what the next word is going to be. And I find it this really beautiful kind of disruption to
mm,
a typical reading process that really makes you slow down. And it is kind of adding this texture to your reading that you can't rush through.
mm,
And I found it just kind of like physically affecting, I think especially right now I'm feeling really overwhelmed by how much there is to read and how much just there is in general and how little time I feel like I have. And every time I would sit down with Erase Genesis, it was like I had to find a different mental and emotional place in order to really
mm.
be with it in the way it demands. And I think that's such a gift, which is not a question, really, just an observation.
Well, I'm so thankful to hear it. That's been my heart's prayer for this work, that it taught me so much about the safety of quiet. And so it is my hope that it can offer other people that, just a space, just a small space to be really present and quiet. That's why the designer of the press's designer was really kind to collaborate with me. And that's why I wanted to make a book that felt like a book of hours, or just intimate,
Yeah.
you know, like a private, intimate space. So the textures in the book's making, the linen cover, the ribbon bookmark, the texture on the paper, we spent months thinking about, like, how can we create a very simple object that offers a physical invitation.
Mhm.
to, yes, be present with the poems, but really to experience the poems as an invitation to re-enter the part of the self that is the place in which we're all connected.
Hmm. It's really beautiful and just affecting reading experience, and I'm really grateful for it.
Oh, thank you.
This may not be interesting for you to think about. This is just a curiosity I have. One thing you and I have in common is that our first books both have apocalypse in the title.
Yeah, yeah.
So I'm curious, like, what I don't necessarily think of apocalyptic literature as a literature about an ending, but that is like often an understanding or interpretation. So I'm wondering thinking of apocalypse as associated with a kind of an end. What does it feel like for you to kind of start there and to find yourself in a story about beginnings in a way now?
Oh, that's nice. That's nice. It's tough for me to sort of, at this point, it's tough for me to associate the word apocalypse with endings.
Yeah.
And I'd imagine it's true for you too, for the same
Yeah.
reasons, right?
Yeah.
I grew up in the what I now think of as the old ways of the Methodist Church in the way that you did, you know.
Hmm.
And I think often about in your book you talk about your daddy saying that the Bible is a book that invites us to ask questions, not know
Hmm.
answers, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
Um, and that was the that was the best of my relationship to Methodism too. I
Hmm.
understand that. So I say that to say that when I did attend church, I don't anymore, but when I did, I had a pastor in that good fellowship in the Methodist Church. I'm remembering who, when I asked him about the Book of Revelations, and I was in a culture of interpreting it as an end times book,
Hmm. Yeah.
he simply said, "Well, what happens when you let go of ideas?
Mm-hmm.
What happens when you just take a minute to believe it?" Meaning, believe the images, like
Hmm.
see in your mind the bronze feet
Hmm.
and just incarnate it here. What happens to us when we do that, you know? And so that was a foundational relationship I have with the word apocalypse. And of course, now I know that it was a genre
Hmm.
that was practiced by many. And it's a genre in which we pretend to imagine a ecstatic state or a futuristic state, but really it's about understanding something that's happening in the now.
Hmm.
And so I tend to think of even, you know, Erased Genesis is doing the same thing, right? Like a lot of the question that I had in my heart while I was working is, what, you know, what new origin story do we need? What new beginning do we need? You know, because if we get
Hmm.
stuck in the idea that we have failed the earth, failed each other, there's no way to hope.
Hmm.
You know, another of my teachers is Wendell Berry, and he once wrote me a letter saying that despair was the work of cowards.
Hmm.
And he told me to find a little job to do, you know? um, and that ended up being render. So um, I think, you know, it goes back to what you were saying a minute ago. I think that in different cultures it's different stories, but cultures have foundational stories. When they are tied to a sense, an experience, or an idea of the divine, they get seated in us in a very deep way. And neurologically, I mean,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
like, and when you're raised in it, your brain forms around it. And you can continue to live out the terms of your original relationship with it. You can reject it entirely, or you can remake it, which is what you were
Hmm.
saying a minute ago, right? For me, I had to find a safe place in it
Hmm.
for myself in order to not be divided against myself,
Hmm.
you know? And that process has meant finding ways to be welcome in those stories again. And so, there's no, I truly pray that we can remember
Mhm.
our belonging to each other. And by each other, I mean my belonging to my place, to the cardinal I watched eat a worm a few minutes before we joined this call, to you, you know.
Mhm.
Um, that is work of the now. And the more I devote my attention to the now, I have more hope.
Mhm. It's a really beautiful way of saying that. Thank you. I needed to hear that today.
Oh, I'm glad. I'm glad. It's so tough to, I mean, my whole life is devoted to language, and it's so increasingly, and might be what Jean was saying to us, but increasingly as I age, the more I'm interested in the space underneath the language, right? Like this,
Mhm.
Willis Barnstone, the translator, talks about how all writing is translation. And when you are ostensibly working as a translator, you're working with a source text and you're bringing it into it. But when you're writing, you're translating from the ineffable place within, you know.
Mhm.
Um, I think that's true. That's been true in my
Mhm.
practice anyway. And I'm increasingly more and more interested in just being in that quiet, ineffable place.
Mhm. And I think it's uh, also really moving to think about you kind of starting with the Ellen Davis book, um, which I also have loved, and a
Thanks.
lot of kind of writing about scripture. And then it's such a beautiful, like, alternate process, not to necessarily add a bunch more extrapolation or thoughts about a text, but just to find your way into it, to make a way for you to be welcomed into it again. Is just it's just another really beautiful way of working with these texts that are definitely deeply wound neurologically for me,
Yeah. Yeah.
for better or worse.
Yeah. Yeah. It's I work with writers often who were were and are traumatized by the church.
Mm,
And it's very interesting to me that how much of religion, writ large, interfaith, is really just like story,
mhm.
which is amazing.
Yeah.
How extraordinary that as a species, have engaged our partially evolved consciousness, which includes the imagination, to find this technology of story and then to figure out how it can be as minimalist as possible so that
Mhm.
it's as portable as possible,
Yeah.
which is what myth is,
Mhm.
you know? And it's that deep relationship we're trying to find language for that just does change us neurologically. What I find when I work with writers who are traumatized by the church is that story can wound and story can heal. And maybe when story has wounded you, maybe the only vaccine is to rewrite the story.
Mhm.
And so, it's my hope that as I travel with Erase Genesis, one thing I'd like to do is create workshop spaces where everyone gets a set of watercolors, everyone gets pages of the text they think of as sacred,
Mhm.
you know, and they get to listen to the silent spaces that they hear.
Mhm.
If I can come over and over and over again to the first chapter of Genesis and it wants to say this to me, and then it wants to say this to me, and then it wants to, right? What else might it want to say
Mhm.
through others? So that's something that interests me. I'm excited to find out the answer to that question.
Yeah, that's amazing. I want to be there. I've I've noticed with my son, he's almost 6, and he'll ask me about different Bible stories. He'll kind of hear a mention of something, or ask me, what happens after we die, or just these kind of, like, he's getting into these, like, theological and existential questions. And I'm finding it really moving to say, well, some people think this, and some people think this, and some people think this. And then he'll say, well, what do you think? And I'm like, I don't know. And I keep thinking I'm probably going to create a person that, by the time he's 18 or whatever, is like very attracted to black and white forms of religion because I'm not
Okay.
being.
Maybe, maybe.
Whoops. I've overlearned my lesson. Um, but I thought when I was spending time with Erased Genesis, I thought about a time when he was in his pediatrician's office and there was a little book version of Jonah and the Whale. And he asked me to read it to him, and I started reading, and very quickly I could tell like I'm not okay with this interpretation of events.
Yeah, yeah.
So he could just tell like that I'm just making up words that are not on the page and trying to get through it really quickly. But I thought I'm so grateful that I'm not disturbed by the process of messing with these texts. I think it's what they're there for, and we'll see what happens to him through that process. But I feel good about it. We can
Yeah,
we can make it up together.
yeah, yeah. I think you should have confidence that you're creating a safe space for him, you
Thank
know?
you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Safe, maybe a little confusing, but
It's okay. Mystery is confusing. That's one of its great blessings, I think, to confound us, you know? I mean, we're talking about a religion in which that's called Christianity, meaning like, what does it mean to be like Christ? And one thing I think about when I think about that question is like, well, speaking in paradox is one way to do it,
yeah.
right? You know, what does it look like to spend your life using language in a way that is about the opened space of confounding
hmm
guidance, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Seeing a bunch of people that want to be like you and just purposefully confusing them.
Right. Yeah, just like, I mean, it is the opposite of what we see when we see preachers who want a following,
Yeah.
you know? Um,
Spooky.
or followers who want an idea that's clean and easy to follow. It's the
Yeah.
opposite of that. So, I think I want to send you a little hug and tell you you're doing just right.
Thank you. It's the best I can do. Well, I know in another interview you mentioned that this might be part of a trilogy. I don't know if that's is that like something you want to talk about or no?
There's not much I can say about it at this point, but that is the plan. Yeah, I'm writing the next two books now, and I have some intuition of where they're headed, but I'm definitely in the process of just listening to them and
Yeah.
wanting to be surprised. I think I think the story that I'm in, which is kind of sketched out in Erased Genesis, is the what I think is just true, which is by practicing dominion, we've exiled ourselves
Mhm.
from the natural world and therefore what I understand to be God or divine. Wanting to be separate means we're separated.
Mhm.
It has been when I'm home in Kentucky, which is where I am right now, and I'm listening to the natural world in the way I was trying to put language to a minute ago. What I experience is something like the prodigal son, right? Like it's something like being welcomed home,
Mhm.
that
Yeah.
all this bounty awaits us if we just stop trying to control it,
Mhm. Yeah.
you know?
Mhm.
So one thing I'm thinking about is, you know, how climate change is in some ways well, I just hear in it the natural world, which again I receive as divine, the natural world begging us to come home.
But I'm so grateful for the chance to talk to you about this book, and it's so beautiful. And I'm just so excited to think about all the readers that are going to connect with it and find their own way home and their own way into these stories.